Alright, in this video, we're going to talk about how I went from introverted gaming addict to remote $100,000 front-end developer so that you can do the same. So if you are a career switcher, if you're looking to get into this industry, I'm going to share exactly what worked for me so that you know what might work for you and how you can get into this industry, how you can start earning that remote six figures sooner rather than later, without the fluff, without the bullshit. Here we are. Let's get it. So if you don't know me, my name is Jake. I'm an ex-Amazon engineer, and I'm making these videos to share exactly what did work, what didn't work, what I'm actively doing to earn $100,000 in a remote role as a front-end developer. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this video. Throughout this video, there's going to be a kind of a common theme, and I want to walk you through, if you're going through this right now, if you're learning and you don't really know what's going on, or, maybe you feel a little uncertain or hopeless at times, I want to show you this picture. It's very helpful for me, and it's going to relate a lot to this video. And so if you're actively on your journey, just think about it's like, where are you on this kind of Dunning-Kruger effect, on this hero's journey, if you will, right? Because odds are, if you're feeling pretty down, if you've been at this for a little while, if you're feeling pretty down, just understand that it's a natural part of this process here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, what happened on my journey and what you can kind of expect, okay? When I was growing up, when I was a kid, I was pretty introverted, right? I was, for the most part, an only child. I spent a lot of time alone, and I had to figure out how to entertain myself. So I learned from a young age, it's like, how was I going to entertain myself, right? I played a lot of baseball, but beyond baseball, I was kind of left to my own devices, okay? So I quickly had to learn how to entertain myself. And what that ended up turning into was kind of this gaming addiction, where from a young age, I was playing different games that, I don't remember what I played super early on. I played a little like Club Penguin, things like that, but mostly like RuneScape. So I picked up RuneScape from a young age, and that was like crack cocaine. I mean, that was the most addicting thing in the world. And I would sit there and grind, get 99s, get better at the game. And that was my life for several years. I'd sit there and I'd played. If it was summer and I wasn't in school, I'd play 12 to 16 hours a day. I would just sit there and grind. And so I don't know if that's relatable to you, but I was very introverted at the time. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to socialize. I didn't want to like go meet new people or whatever, right? I was still a young kid. I'm talking like middle school and earlier. I just sit there and I was addicted to video games. I would just play, right? So this was whenever I had the opportunity, I would sit there and play for 12, 16 hours a day. Excuse my bad handwriting here. And even like when I was in school, I would sit there and grind at night and just hours and hours poured into this. So that's kind of where I started. All right. So I didn't really have any skills. Wasn't a super talented kid, right? Just sit there and grind video games. That started to change in high school a little bit, all right? In high school, I started to take school a little more serious, was very focused on baseball, and in high school is when I actually had my first introduction to coding, all right? So I had this first introduction to coding where I built my first websites, all right? So this was my first websites. All right. So I had a pretty good teacher here that's kind of caught my interest in coding and taught the basics of HTML and CSS. Now, at this time in my life, I didn't know I wanted to be a front-end developer. I didn't know I wanted to be an engineer. Hell, I didn't even know what those were. Okay. I was in high school. I cared about going out, having fun. I cared about baseball, and I cared about like girls. That was basically it, right? I didn't really care that much about school. I knew I wanted to go to a good school or whatever, but I wasn't thinking about money at this time too much. I was just like, hey, let's go, this is a cool class. Let's take it. I need it to graduate. So I'm going to try, I'm going to try my best here. Ended up being a very good course, piqued my interest in coding, but not too much beyond that, right? I knew I was pretty good. I did pretty well relative to the class. And I was like, okay, maybe there's something here, right? Where I can, it kind of felt like playing a game where I was just, I could type away on the computer, grind in my little own world. I didn't have to talk to anybody else. I could just like lock into the code, lock into what it was I was building. And there were no problems, right? Everything was golden there. It felt like a adult's version of a video game, right? So, if we go back to our Dunning-Kruger here, this is kind of where, this is where I'm starting to climb this hill, right? So as a kid, sitting there addicted to video games, right? So this is addicted to video games here. This is me kind of climbing this hill, right? So I'm in high school. I'm like, oh, wow, I'm pretty good at this, right? No problem. I can smoke others at what I'm doing. And even more so, I remember distinctly, I was riding in the car. I was a senior in high school. I came across this article talking about how a Stanford grad started making $100,000 right out of school working for Google. And at that time in my mind, I was like, holy crap, that is a lot of money. For years and years and years, that has been the gold standard of like, if you're a man, you want to make six figures, right? And I remember being 17, 18 years old, and I was like, oh my gosh, how could I reproduce this for myself? Because in my mind, I've always thought this way. It's like, if somebody can do it, why not me, right? If somebody is able to do it, why not me? Now, I didn't go to Stanford, all right? I didn't get into Stanford. I wanted to go to Stanford, but I didn't, I just I didn't get into the school. Okay. But that didn't stop me from being like, hey, look, you know, if somebody can do it, why not me? And so that's kind of what I took away from this article. There is a path out there to 6 figures. Okay. There is a path out there. It exists, right? I've seen somebody do it. There is a path out there to 6 figures young. Okay. You don't have to be 40 years old. You don't have to be 30 years old. You don't have to be 50 years old to start earning this kind of money. That was a belief breaking moment for me, when I read this article. And this was in high school, right? I was 17 or 18 years old. And you can see I'm kind of climbing this confidence thing where it's like, all right, well, if I do this, I can make a lot of money. Okay. I can make a lot of money. All right. So that was still in high school. I get to college. Okay. I get to college and actually going to college and I didn't know what I wanted to study. Frankly, I did not know what I wanted to study. So I went to an engineering school, but I was completely undecided. And it was like I had completely forgot about that article that I had read in high school. I was completely undecided, didn't know what I wanted to study. I knew I was going to try hard and knew I wanted to make a lot of money. That was kind of the only thing I cared about. I cared about money, and I cared about girls, and I cared about sports. Kind of the only things I cared about, right? It's kind of funny writing that down. It sounds goofy, but that's what mattered to me, right? I wanted to make a lot of money. I wanted a beautiful girl, and I wanted to have fun with my friends, like playing sports. I didn't put too much thought into what I wanted to study until one day I woke up one morning in my bed. I was hungover from a night of drinking, and it dawned on me that I had totally forgot about this article I read in high school. All right. And by the way, as an engineering school, like I had talked to a million people about what they studied, what they liked about what they studied, what they didn't like about what they studied. But I'd be lying if I said this wasn't a completely irrational decision to go and study computer science. And I was very fortunate that I made that decision. I'll speak about that why. But I was hungover one morning in my dorm and I just said, screw it. I'm going to study computer science. Okay. I had never taken an actual coding class beyond, HTML and CSS, which is in many ways not necessarily programming. It is in its own way, but it's a little different. But on a whim, I decided, hey, let's study computer science. I remember that article I had read in high school about the Stanford grad, make it 6 figs. That was that. And so I was well on my way down this journey. Okay. So I was studying computer science. And by the way, if you're watching this video and you're like, hey, look, I'm not in college. I'm older. I don't know if I can afford / have the time to go back to college. It's totally fine, right? If you want to break into this industry, what I'll get to and what I'll cover is like the skills that ultimately ended up paying off the most for me. I learned outside of college, didn't need college for it. I did not need 4 years to learn how to code. As a matter of fact, I could have done it in weeks, knowing what I know now. What actually matters in software engineering is a very, very, very small subset of what's actually taught in school, and you don't need all the theory and so on and so forth. So anyways, at this point in my life, I had made the decision. I was going to study computer science. All right. And that's kind of when I got to that next, now that I'm studying computer science, what am I actually going to learn in school? And that's when I was introduced to Python. I did not know what Python was before this. I did not research on the internet. I didn't know, kind of what was going on, but this is where I learned about conditionals. This is where I learned about for loops, file input, output, conditionals, loops, imports. We learned about file input, output. We learned about, I don't even know what else out there, but basically the coding basics. All right. So this was a 101 crash course. We didn't build anything too meaningful other than like, hey, these are the basics of coding. And it's very important to learn. If I was learning it today, I would have done this in JavaScript just because JavaScript is, as a front end developer, you'll be using it a lot more. But Python was a good enough intro. It was a good enough intro for me that, I could kind of get going. And what I quickly learned is I was pretty naturally proficient at this without trying too hard. It came very naturally to me, and I could sit there and just grind out these exercises, and it was pretty fun. And what I found most rewarding about it, there's a very quick feedback loop, and in hindsight, what that was kind of like gave me a reminder of is like video games, right? It's where you play, you get that quick dopamine hit. You play, get that quick dopamine hit. Coding is the exact same way. Very, very quick feedback loops. And when it works, you get that dopamine loop, and it is like crack cocaine. It's just so addicting because you type something, you get that immediate feedback. There are very few things in life like that, and they tend to be not necessarily good for you, right? Fast food, drugs, alcohol, things like that, where you can take something, you can do something, and you get that immediate dopamine, like not necessarily good dopamine. The thing with coding is it translates to money. So in a lot of ways, it's a very beneficial quick dopamine loop or quick feedback loop. So anyways, that's where I learned to code. That was coding 101. And by the way, let's go back up to our Dunning-Kruger here. This is kind of where I'm at. I will say I'm right here. This is coding 101. I thought I was the shit. I took that one class. I'm like, oh, I'm so good at this. I know everything. It's too easy, yada, yada, yada. And that is when I landed my first job as an IT intern. I was making $15 an hour. So I was making $15 an hour. I thought I was a king. Okay. I thought I was a king. This was more money than I had ever seen in my life. Okay. I was getting paid professionally as an engineer. I was making $15 an hour. And so what happens when I get on the job? They tell me to use an API, automate business processes to automate stuff. And I remember hearing that and I was like, what's an API? And very quickly I learned, I was like, okay, I'm not nearly as smart as I thought I was. I don't know everything. There's a lot of stuff out there. And I kind of start falling down this hole. But internship ended up being great. Learned a lot, worked kind of independently, but I had a little bit of help, a little bit of guidance to expand my mind as to what is actually out there. Okay. So it got that first experience on my resume, which was very important for going and landing subsequent jobs. All right. So this experience opened the door to more jobs and better money. And that was the biggest takeaway from this summer. Now, what happened after this? I was in college at the time and that summer internship ended. And so it was time to go back to school. So what did I actually learn in school following that internship? It was object-oriented programming in data structures and algorithm. Now, these courses, they were taught in Java. And the reason they were taught in Java was to teach us things about like a strongly typed language, things like that. So you get exposure to some of the deeper fundamentals of coding and programming. But if I was learning it today, I would not go as deep as that, just to get your feet wet, just to get into the industry as fast as possible. I would just go with JavaScript, untyped JavaScript, and start learning these things. But nonetheless, that's what I studied. I studied object-oriented programming. I studied data structures and algorithms. And that's what kind of paved the way to ace later technicals. Now, I will mention that these help me understand how to solve some of the leak code problems, how to actually go deeper or solve these questions more efficiently. These classes, they didn't necessarily teach me how to program. They were pretty theoretical, but they did get my hands dirty with trees, with maps, with different data structures, with classes and things like that. So the material in these classes was pretty useful. I wouldn't go about it the same way they did, but it was pretty freaking useful. Okay. So that was my next learning. And after this coursework, I was able to land an internship at a bank where I was making $32 an hour. $32 an hour at this time, right? So this is the equivalent of a $64,000 a year salary. Pretty freaking good for like a 19-year-old kid or 20-year, whatever it is. Pretty freaking good. And so over here, I was writing React, JavaScript, and then, maybe some basic HTML, CSS. All I did was basically build a prototype, right? A vending machine prototype. And here was the first time that I was really exposed to software kind of in a professional setting. I was under a senior engineer who knew exactly what he was doing. I was working with one other intern. Neither of us knew what the hell we were doing. But we learned on the job, and he taught us how data is passed around from, say a backend through an API, and data is passed over to the client or like the front end, right? So the actual browser here. So we'll call that the front ends. That was when I was exposed to, okay, so like an API is going to pass a JSON of data over to the front end, and the front end is going to make sense of that and actually render a web page. That was the first time I was exposed to that paradigm. Call me dumb, call me naive, whatever. It took me this long to understand kind of how that worked. And I don't want to say I was in despair. I was working at this point, but I think I realized how little I actually knew. That only went deeper when I landed the next internship at Amazon, okay? So I went from $32 an hour, the equivalent of 64 grand a year, over to Amazon where I was making $60 an hour as an intern, which is the equivalent of 120 grand. Okay. Over here is when I really learned I did not know what I was doing. So this internship was in Python mostly. And so I did several things. So I wrote a command line, package. I don't know what you want to call it. Command line package. We did some API gateway stuff. We had a Lambda, and then we had some database stuff. We'll just call it database. I built a full microservice. Okay. And so this wasn't even a front-end internship. But it gave me experiences that helped me made me a better front-end developer, right? Because I understood how I could make a command line script, how I could build an API, how I could build a Lambda, how I could make a database. This gave me some confidence to be like, oh, I don't have to know everything off the rip, but I can go and figure it out. And I think that's a very important mindset to have as an engineer, where you don't need to have all the answers immediately. It's your job to be a problem solver. It's your job to understand trade-offs, to understand how different pieces of the puzzle fit together and come to a set of solutions that all solve the problem, but they have different trade-offs, right? And a lot of times what you'll find, or what I've found, is there's tons of ways to solve problems. And what we call that is like the solution space. There's tons of ways to solve problems, and oftentimes a few different solutions can be quote unquote correct. They just have different trade-offs, okay? And that's what I learned over here. For example, one trade-off I remember making was, are we going to have a single database, or are we going to have distributed databases that kind of sync the data over time, right? Are we going to host this microservice in one region, or are we going to spread it out across several regions so that we can decrease latency for the client? So sounds buzzwordy, sounds complex, not that complex. When I first got there and they were talking about all these different things, I was like, what the hell are you talking about? I've never even heard the words you're saying. And so that's when I would say I was kind of at, I felt really dumb. I felt really dumb. I was down here. People were talking a million miles an hour, and I was like, dude, what? I thought I was smart. I thought I went to a good school. I thought I knew everything. Felt really, really dumb. But ended up making it. They thought I did great. And so I ended up getting a return offer, right? Return offer for, I believe it was like 153 grand. 153 grand right there. So mind you, at that point in my life, I was like 21 years old. I was still in school. Didn't even have a degree. And so this is what's possible as an intern. As an intern, seeing that kind of money is just, it's dizzying. All right. This is what's possible in this industry from a young age. And if you're trying to switch into this industry, more power to you. You have more experience. You have more life experience. You can do more. So that was the Amazon internship. And after that, I had some more coursework here and there. And following that, that is when I went full time with engineering. And since then, I've been making six figures remotely as an engineer ever since I started. So this has been years, plural. And honestly, I can say it's been a very rewarding journey. When I first started, even through my first few years, say years 1 to 3, I still felt like I was drinking from the fire hose. I still felt pretty dumb, honestly. Not dumb, but like that I didn't know everything, that there was still so much to learn, that there was still so many ways I could improve my skills. And that's such a beautiful thing about, coding and engineering is there is so much information out there about what you can learn, different facets of coding, of different facets of engineering, different problems to solve. There are so many different problems to solve. There are so many different languages, things like that. The game is infinite. There's no way you can possibly ever master everything in a lifetime. And that's part of what's appealing about it. It's like, you'll never get bored. There's so much to learn that the game never ends, right? There's always more money to make. There's always something new to learn. There's always a new problem to cut your teeth on. And so that's what's I've really enjoyed about it. Okay. So going back up to our Dunning-Kruger here, when I first started, I started feeling better because I was earning a lot of money at the time, right? Relative to my friends and things like that. Like I was earning a lot of money. I still felt pretty dumb on the job, but over time, that confidence has increased. I work more. I solve harder problems. I start realizing like, oh, I'm starting to fix issues in other people's work, right? And you start to feel more confident and more confident and more confident. And over time, I'm not going to say I'm an expert. I'm not even that advanced in my career, but I've felt this curve where it's been like, oh, I'm a lot better than I was a year ago. I'm a ton better than I was a couple of years ago. And I can command higher salaries, right? I can earn more because I'm more valuable. I can contribute more to a business because I can solve more problems. And I can tie those problems into business needs. Okay. So that was kind of my journey up to being a remote engineer. Now, how long did this actually take? I'm sure you're wondering. How long did this cost me to go through? High school is obviously high school. Articles free. I went to college. I went to a state school. All right. I did not go to a fancy school. I don't even remember exactly how much it costs, but I went to a state college. Okay. If you're watching this video, odds are you aren't necessarily in college. Maybe you're thinking about doing a boot camp. Maybe you're thinking about learning online. Maybe you're just interested. Okay. So all in, I think mine was less than 100 grand. Can't remember the exact number here, but it was a state school and I had a scholarship that ended up paying for my school. So realistically, I think this was less than 50 grand. A lot of money in hindsight, but again, I made this kind of money in my first year. So I would say the ROI was definitely there on going to college. But that being said, if you're not in college, maybe you feel too old to go to college. You don't want to pay this price tag. Like that is totally okay, because in other videos I cover here, the base skills you need to actually break in as a front-end developer, the base skills you need to actually be an engineer, you don't need all this theory. The thing with college and studying computer science, there is so much theory that just goes completely unused. An example I'll give is math. You don't need multivariable calculus to be an engineer. Hell, you don't even need calculus to be an engineer. Okay. You don't need advanced algorithms to be an engineer. You don't need artificial intelligence necessarily to be a front-end engineer, right? There's just like all this coursework and things you learn that, granted, I find interesting. I enjoyed taking them, but they aren't needed to do the job. And so if your goal is to get to this as soon as possible, right? You can do that in a matter of weeks, months, really. So that is what I'll say on that. But this was my exact path from basically introverted nerd to high school, got my feet wet, went, exposed to a little bit of money about what's possible, and then going from hungover college kid to now making 100 grand a year in a remote role for the past several years. That is what my journey looked like. Took a few years because it was all spread out over college, but in reality, this could have been done a lot quicker. Okay. So again, my name is Jake. I'm making these videos for free so that you understand exactly how you can break into the industry as a front-end developer, how you can start earning money like this. Okay. So if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, leave a comment. That shows me that you care. Boost it out to other people who are also looking for help. Now, if you want to go faster at this, if you want me to hold your hand to help get you into this industry, go ahead and click the link down below in the description. I've included a free training for you. Shares exactly how I did this, exactly how you can do this, how you can go at this faster. All right. So if you're looking for faster results, go click the link in the description or go to frontendfuture.com and you can book in some time with me. We can speak on the phone about how we can help you get there quicker. Okay. So again, thank you for watching the video. Make sure to like, make sure to comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.